from Australia, describes sovereignty as men and women using their God-given talents to show self-mastery and respect for all others. He says that life values or virtues are the conscious secret, yet neuroscience and psychology cannot tell us what consciousness is. Ken resolved that problem. He shows how we can thrive and prosper as sovereign people. Better still, how 20 natural laws gifted by our Creator render all man-made legislation redundant. And that spells freedom for all. Kenneth's work is astonishing. He is a researcher, objective philosopher, psychoepistemologist, published author, and content creator for the one great network in America.
Purity Coffee has one primary goal: to improve the world's health through coffee. This goal encompasses everyone involved in the Purity ecosystem and supply chain, including consumers, farmers, employees, and all creatures. It has taken a team of coffee experts from various fields, such as agronomists and engineers and supply chain experts, to bring about this change by looking at coffee from a fresh, new perspective.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Sovereign Sisters Podcast. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties in the beginning. I hope you've had an opportunity to watch the intro video that Ken had supplied. I will include it with this recording, so you'll have it. But here we are. 2025 starts off with a bang. We had technical difficulties a little while at the end of 24. We hope that would straighten up. But apparently, I've got to figure out this software and let it run. So let me begin by introducing my guest on today's show. We're going to be diving into the groundbreaking work of Ken Bartle. He's a New Zealand-born, Australian-based philosopher, researcher, and author whose revolutionary ideas are reshaping how we understand consciousness, morality, and natural law. With decades of research into the inner workings of the conscious and subconscious mind, Ken bridges metaphysics, psychology, and objective philosophy, uncovering roots of now what we know as human sciences and education. Ken's the author of pivotal books like Conscious Ascendance, Navigate to Freedom, and Nature's Providence, which explore the principles of intrinsic natural law and its profound implications for individual rights, personal sovereignty, and societal governance. We're happy to have all of you with us today as we explore Ken's vision for a just and moral society, and it's all grounded in immutable natural laws, which empower humanity to ascend into a new epoch of freedom and self-governance. We invite you to participate in this conversation by sharing your questions and comments in the chat. Of course, your voice always matters. So I want to welcome you, Ken, and thank you for bearing with the technical difficulties.
Thank you very much, Angela. I'm sorry if there's some background noise. I've got a fellow mowing my lawns outside the door.
That's okay. Goes with everything else that's going on, right? We'll have some sound interference everywhere. So let's just start.
But firstly, let me say Happy New Year to you and to all your viewers. Great to be on the show. Great to be talking from the land down under into the land up over America. And thank you very much for your kind invitation and wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Well, Ken, we're so happy to have you here. I've looked into your work and I find it very interesting. And of course, along the lines of sovereignty is exactly what we're here for in Sovereign Sisters. So let's start from the beginning. What inspired you to start studying consciousness and natural law? Was there like some defining moment along your path?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Back in 2012, I'd filmed a video from my son who tried to import a 1959 Chevrolet Corvette car that it had remade. It was found on the scrap heap and it completely rebuilt it from scratch, virtually. And he tried to import that into Australia and ran into all sorts of troubles with the Australian government. And digging deeper, he found that we had two parliaments, two constitutions, and two governments. Now, clearly one of them was not the operative one, But the long story short, he went back to America and he's still there. He's actually captaining a yacht off the Bahamas at the moment. But that left me twiddling my thumb saying, how do we repurpose government? And so I knew that Admiralty law didn't work, so I turned my attention to common law, which I knew worked in Australia, in Australia and in America. And I found that common law was quite different between those two countries. I won't go into all the details, it's too long a story. But I switched off that and because I learned that natural law underpinned common law. So I looked at natural law, and that didn't satisfy me either. So I argued that if divine law was going to work, it's going to work through our conscious process. So I turned my attention and said, what is consciousness? And neuroscience said, we don't know. Psychologists said, we don't know. Philosophers, most of them, say, we don't know. And I said, I'm going to find out. And so I turned my head to it. And so that was the pivotal moment that you mentioned. And that's what switched me. And so for 12 years, well, actually for the first 7 years, I researched what consciousness is. I turned to observational science and deductive reasoning. In other words, even just looking at infants in a pram, what are they responding to? And is their response joyful or is it sad? Is it terrible? And from that, I started to learn and I started to piece things together, and eventually I came to that conclusion. So in 2017, I published a book called Law from Within, and that was in two parts. The first part dealt with what I'd learned about the conscious process, because I found that it was, in fact, a process. It's not a thing, it's not an entity, it's not something we find in the human body. It's like a process like you would have in a factory, where you start with a raw product at one end and finish up with a shiny new product at the other. So that's the process which consciousness is. And so in that, I found there are 20 natural laws which govern how that process works. Now, they're not like laws as we understand them. They're not legislations made by a Congress or a Parliament. They're actually more like the law of gravity. They're there to help us and to help that process work within us so that we can respond to it and profit handsomely. And so I published that book in 2017. And since then, I published a blog site for several months, 18 months actually. And then I got to the point where I thought I need to rewrite this book, but it's too much for one book, so I'll make two, which I did, which was Conscious Ascendance and Navigate to Freedom, which followed that in close succession. And that effectively meant my first book, Law from Within, became redundant because I retold the story in two books. And then I found that there was more to it, and I went on to that and I published Nature's Providence, which was the third book, which introduced that whole subject back into the realm of philosophy. And more recently, in fact, only just over the Christmas break, I've even started to take that whole construct and relate it now to artificial intelligence. But that's a whole new story.
I imagine. So, are you going to delve into artificial intelligence consciousness?
Sort of, yes. But effectively, AI is fraught with a lot of problems. And part of those problems that it has to do with our understanding of where we're getting that information from in the first place. And is it valid and truthful? Is it lawful? Is it moral? Is it ethical? Is it spiritual? And the answer is no, we don't even look in that department. We just reproduce what's been produced. And there's one of the inherent problems. Then, of course, comes the ability of the programmer to translate that information into the software and how it's presented to people. And that means it's open to his interpretations as well.
Well,
So
isn't it true just like with computers anyway, garbage in, garbage out, whatever
yeah,
it's fed is what it knows. It's not a reasoning, it doesn't have capability of taking thought and extracting what is good and what is bad. It is
right,
told what is good and what is bad, and that's what it spits back at you.
yep. So that's where I'm interjecting the difference now, because the conscious process now can be used as a mentoring faculty, which mentors that information, which filters out the nonsensical stuff, the non-factual, and the criminal, if you want, and it only produces that which is good. And that's a whole new ballgame for intelligence in a computer. I call it mentored intelligence. In other words, we're using the intelligence of a computer to mentor the information and give us only which is right and spiritual and profitable for humanity. Whole new
So
ballgame.
let's go back to the human consciousness, because that's really where the focus of your work is. It's great that you're going to look into the AI consciousness, and I think that is the future that we're going to know. Wow, no matter what, that's where we're headed.
Yes,
So, talking about human consciousness, you developed a model with was it 9 faculties of consciousness, and
yes,
I believe it's more than what current science recognizes. Is that correct?
yes. I've actually diagrammed that in what I call a value transfer wave. I sent you that diagram. It's number one on your list. If it's
All
taught,
righty, let me bring that up and we can discuss it.
if you can put
There
that
we
on
go.
your screen.
There it is.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so what that represents is the conscious process in a sine wave, and there's a horizontal line that runs right through from left to right, a dotted orange line, very thin, right across there. And what that means is that everything below that line is the subconscious mind, and everything above it is what we call the conscious mind, basically, which is our free will. Now, the reason we call it subconscious is because it's below our level of awareness. And if you look at the left hand side of that diagram, you'll see the word perception in green. That's below the line, which means that it's operating in the subconscious mind. And what it does is it makes us aware, and that's in the immediately above that, that horizontal line, which means we become aware of what is perceived by the subconscious mind. Now, below that perception is a graphic there which is called integration. And what that means is our perception when we look at something across the room, we don't actually see what's there. What our senses perceive is angles, lines, colours, planes, reflections, differences in texture, all manner of things, thousands and thousands of bits of information. And what our perception does is it pieces it together so that what we see or what we perceive we are seeing is a vision of what it's looking at. And so we become consciously aware of what that is. Now, from that, moving up the diagram, we go through a process of inquiry and discernment. We start thinking about what it is that we're looking at, and we start looking at potentials. Can we cook it? Can we eat it? Can we manufacture it? Can we sell it? Can we ship it across the world? What can we do with it? And so we go through that reasoning process, and we get to the point of imagination right at the top of the picture. And we imagine what we might do with it. We start to explore possibility. Now, leave aside for the moment the images and the value upload. Let's keep going around that curve. We go through that period of exploration of what we can do. Then we get to the point of evaluation. Okay, what's it worth to us? What's it worth? Is it going to affect anybody? And now conscience switch in. As you can see, it's down in the subconscious mind. And it gives us then a choice of whether we either accept what we're doing, alternatively, go back to doing further evaluation because we sense there's a problem. And eventually we get to the point right in the middle of that diagram where we commit to act. What happens then is that our cognitive mind effectively goes back to sleep and the subconscious mind takes over. Now, let me explain. If I decide I want to walk somewhere, I don't stand up on my feet and say left foot forward, transfer body weight, right foot forward, transfer body weight, left foot forward. I just say walk, and the subconscious mind does the rest automatically. And as I do it, it monitors what I'm doing. It makes assessments of whether I'm doing the right thing. It makes adjustments to what I'm doing, like it might adjust the length of my step to accommodate pebbles on a path or rocks or puddles. And so it monitors my progress, goes through towards completion, makes assessments of what I'm doing. You can follow that line all the way around underneath the subconscious mind. And it eventually makes a report in two forms. One is that I see what I have done and I see what I have achieved from what I decided to do. And the second thing is that I'm made aware of feelings as to how successful I was. Did I succeed in what I was doing or did I fail? And that effectively is the conscious process in a nutshell. Now, of course, that repeats because, because if you turn the left side of that picture to the right side, you'll see that what I've really drawn there is a loop. We're back to the feelings, which is the equivalent of perception, and the awareness at the end, which is equivalent of cognitive awareness. And so that loop goes around and around and around. And if you bring up the next diagram,
Well, before we
Andrew,
go on, I just want to make this statement, and you can verify for me. It seems like most of what we do in our lives is subconscious, and then we commit to act once all we've gone through all those phases in the subconscious. We once it's brought to our awareness, then we have the actual thought process. Yes, we're going to do whatever it is we're going to do, and that seems to be the shorter mental process, I guess, that the majority of the work is done in our subconscious. Is that true?
yes, absolutely. In fact, if you look at the numbers, the subconscious mind accounts for about 92% of the whole process. And the conscious process, our thinking and our deliberations, is only about 8%. Now,
Ah,
if you think about that even deeper, if you look at cognitive awareness on the left hand side of that picture, that's only about a tenth of what that conscious process is. That makes it a tenth of 8%, which makes it 0.8 of a percent, which is less than 1%, and yet dictionaries tell us that consciousness is awareness, that zero point 0.8 of 1%. The rest of it, nobody tells us anything about.
so
So
we
the
go
other thing,
through most of our lives doing things because of subconscious thought that we have, and we're really somewhat unaware until we get to that end process and put it back into the consciousness.
yes, that's the beauty of it. Now, if you go back to the top of it, I'm glad you didn't bring up that second diagram for the moment. Go back, go back to the top of that, you'll see our value upload when you've got imagination. Now, imagination, most of us, we think, oh, that, we used that when we were kids. You know, we played cowboys and Indians and doctors and nurses when we were 7 years old. But actually, imagination is creator's gift of a mechanism by which we can make pictures of what we envisage. Now, if you think about it, the old statement, a picture says 1,000 words. That's the ability to condense all sorts of information and store that in our subconscious mind, which is what that diagram shows. Now, the interesting part about it is that I can choose values like courage, truth, honesty, diligence, those sorts of spiritual values, and I can picture how those work by, for argument's sake, mentally thinking of how I might be diligent when I go to a board meeting. Right? I sit there, am I going to be diligent or am I going to interrupt the speaker and make a fuss? Or am I just going to sit back and just offer some respect, another value of who's speaking and let them finish before I make my comment? Now, here's the interesting point. If I don't choose to operate in that fashion and use those values in life, the, the subconscious mind on the right hand side there can't work in a vacuum any more than our stomach can process food if we don't eat. It needs to have values. And if I don't give it particular spiritual values, then it will absorb values from what I did in the past because it said you did that. So those values which were inherent in what you did must be what you value. You wouldn't have done it. So I'm a skeptic that you chose those values. So that's what I'm going to use in what you're doing now. So if I've been a naughty boy in the past, it'll constantly reinforce through my emotions that I want to be a naughty boy. Now there's the problem. The change in this focus on this new era that mankind is moving into is learning how that conscious process works and learning how we can use that imagination to program spiritual values in our mind and completely change the course of humanity.
So it
That's the
has to
subject.
be a conscious effort to make those changes to override those subconscious innate things that the you have the autonomic nervous system. So is it something that your body automatically is going to respond to? That you've
Uh,
been negative or used the wrong motivation, goal, whatever you want to say, in doing bad things or wrong things, that you have to consciously be aware to strip that away or to make the changes to be good and more spiritual?
Here's the beauty of it, Angela, and to all of your viewers. What I'm about to say is absolutely blew my mind when I realised it. There's only about 15 of those true life values, no more. You can upload those to your subconscious mind in about 3 minutes, which means in about 45 minutes you can completely change your life. But here's the most beautiful thing of all. You put all those values on autopilot. Just the same way as you walk automatically, now those values apply to what you do automatically because you programmed them into your subconscious mind. When you realize that, you realize the enormous power that Creator has given all of us to completely and radically change our minds for the better, all backed with His blessing. Isn't that
That's
awesome?
incredible. That is just absolutely incredible. It just proves just how miraculous we were made. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's no other word for it other than miraculous.
I've never seen anybody put a diagram like that together. Most
No.
people talk about consciousness. They say, "Oh, we got to raise our feelings and our vibrations, and all those wonderful things." But not one of them identifies what consciousness is.
Hmm.
If you bring up that second diagram, I can just quickly wrap that one up, and then we can
Oh,
perhaps take some questions from your viewers. Okay, that one's a little bit difficult to see from the background.
yeah. Unfortunately, it was a transparent background, and I didn't want to change it because it was your slide.
All right. Basically, if you go to the left-hand side there, we start with existing reality. We program that into perception, which is shown in that black across that graphic of the subconscious mind. Then it processes out through the top of that. You can see a slightly blue line now, if you look closely, around into conscious awareness. And then it goes across the top, moving towards the right-hand side. And then it goes down through all of those different processes, comes out the bottom as the actions we take, which is now showing in the orange. And that shows us back into the perception process, that report that I mentioned, which is the material outcomes of our actions. It also gives us the feelings, which prompts us through sentience awareness. And so that loop just keeps going round and round and round and round and round in everything we do. Whether I decide I want to make a cup of tea or whether I want to get in the car and drive to the shops, that conscious process is working around and around and around. And as you can see from the right-hand side, our life and our spirituality advance with every cycle. If we program those values into our life. If we don't, if we let the subconscious mind accept whatever values we want, then it'll watch every billboard, every television show, and it will absorb all the values from all of that stuff, including propaganda, and that will permeate our mind, and that will then drive our program. So the
So
question
we
that
can be programmed by external forces rather than internally telling what we want from things. We can allow it to happen to us
yes,
rather than making it happen.
that's the problem we're faced with, and that's the problem that most people have. Their mind automatically defaults to those values, which they haven't necessarily chosen. And the reason they haven't necessarily chosen is not their ignorance or arrogance or even apathy. It's the fact that nobody knows how the conscious process is, and we're not told how this works. And that's the news that I'm bringing to the world. If you bring up that next diagram now, number 3, that's a different way of looking at these 9 faculties. If we start again with existence down at the bottom left-hand side, we go up through the perception process, then up across that horizontal line, we go to conscious awareness and our free will, imagination and reason. We go down through our commitment, down to our chosen actions, and around the circle goes back to perception again. Now, in the middle of that are those right in the middle of the diagram in orange: conscience, feelings, intuition, and reflexes. Those are our internal subconscious faculties because they're all below that dotted horizontal blue line. And conscience and feelings are linked together, intuition and reflexes are linked together, and those two pairs are linked together. Now, once you start to realize that, you realize that all that complexity which is happening in that subconscious mind is driven by that one engine of integration which the perception faculty uses. In other words, we've got a perception faculty there which can handle vast amounts of data, incalculable amounts of data at light speed. And that same engine drives our conscience, our feelings, our intuition, and our reflexes. And it can drive them independently, and it can monitor the results of all of those all as one, which is a fantastic capability that we are all born with. And the government will come in and say, no, you're all a legal entity, you belong to the birth certificate, you don't live as a man or woman, forget all that nonsense, go away. And that's the problem, and that's the era that mankind is changing. We are getting rid of that old dialogue, thank you very much. We've had it for centuries, we're done with it. We're moving into this conscious realm. We're moving into the new realm designed by Creator, a new conscious era for mankind. That's the message I'm trying to bring to the world.
That's excellent. So, in this, looking at your diagram, your conscious awareness goes into free will. Is there an opportunity when you use your free will? Obviously, you can do whatever you want. You can go the good path or you go the not so good path. Does that
Yep.
change based on those values that you accept? You said you can have those values basically like in 45 minutes if you want to change them. How does that affect your free will?
Well, it means that you're using your free will to choose those values. If you think about it for a moment, let me give you an example of how it works. An infant looks at it from where it's sitting on the floor across the room, and it sees a corner of the room and maybe a coffee table, and it says, I would love to be there, but I can't get there. It holds out its hands and it wiggles its fingers, and it tells the subconscious mind, which is seeing through the five senses, it sees the infant moving its fingers, and the subconscious mind gets the message the child wants to be there. So the subconscious mind then starts activating muscles in the child's bottom and legs and arms until it crawls across the wall and it gets there. And when the infant gets there, it expresses joy and delight. I've got here. I can see and touch and feel and taste now up close. I've achieved something. And Mum looks at this and she gets on the computer and she dials up all the friends. And she, guess what? Susan learned to crawl. Isn't that wonderful? That's not really what happened. What happened is that the subconscious mind learned the actions of crawling. The infant learned how to program its subconscious mind. It gave it a value. I want to be over there to see, touch, taste, and explore. I want to advance my life. That's what the subconscious seized on. Now, if we, as adults, don't make that choice to think of things like being conscious and deliberate and having courage and bravery and truth and honesty, then the subconscious mind says, Ken doesn't care about where he is in life. I'll just absorb what values he used in the past, or what I saw on the billboard, or what I saw last night's television, or what I saw some politician tell me I must learn to value in life. Because he watched the program. That must have been his value because that's what he chose to do. But I can override all that when I use that imagination to make images, because what that child showed, what that infant showed, was an image of I want to advance my life. So the vocabulary of the subconscious mind is images. So the more we can make images of where we want to be in this life, the more our subconscious mind says, I know where Ken's going. That's wonderful. I'll take him there.
You know, Ken, this is like the perfect argument for why children, especially very young children, should not have electronic devices, because they need to have their own imagination to learn the experience on their own rather than having some electronic device constantly animated in their face. Doesn't that shut down their own imagination?
Yeah.
Wow. So that again, this says it all. This is so any parent that thinks that giving an electronic device to a young child is a good thing needs to hear this, because this will prove basically you're stymieing the growth of the child from what I can hear.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
You can take that diagram now. Now we can talk full screen.
All right. That was, I looked at them beforehand and I got a sense of what you were going to talk about, but that example brings it to light how important it is for us to use our own imagination and not rely on something else to tell us, here, imagine this, or here, go do that, rather than you consciously and subconsciously valuing something. Like you said, the child wanted to go to that across the room to the table. That's something that the child actively did, even if it was a subconscious process. I think we do so much of our day-to-day lives subconsciously, and we don't realize why we're doing what we're doing, that if we took a moment of thought and said, is this really what I want to do, or should I imagine things in a different way, that our whole life could change.
Well, one of the other things that I observed when I was watching those, because I watched countless videos of children learning to crawl. Tell you what, it was quite an experience. One of the things that I learned is that the child gets halfway across the room and mum comes in and says, "Come on, kiddo, it's time for the bath." The kid will scream blue murder. And the child loves the bath. It loves getting in the splashing in the water. But it was interrupted in what it had told its conscious mind it wanted to do, and the
Right.
mother interrupted its path, and that's why it screamed. Now you start to think about the screaming that is going on in the world at the moment, around the globe, in just about every country. People are screaming because government is standing in their way.
Hmm.
That's what's happening at the infant
And
level.
why are people not making it more visible? Why are they still reticent? I mean, I see more and more people speaking out now. It's been 5 years that this has been going on. But now they find, I mean, does it take that long for people to absorb this and really kind of get it into their own consciousness, what's going on? Or is there some
Well,
other factor?
well, the factor is basically that they're attuned to accepting that what they see on the news or on social media is gospel truth. They're not challenging the truth of what they're seeing and saying to themselves, is it true or is it false? In other words, they haven't really learned how to use the conscious process. Now, here's the real tragedy. If you think about it, technology has advanced rapidly, particularly over the last 50 years, the time that I've been on this planet. Absolutely rapid advance. I grew up, my uncle had a Model A Ford, would you believe? Right?
That's great.
Gone. Those things are gone,
Yeah.
long since. Right? Technology has advanced rapidly, but we are still in the age where we believe that we've got to vote for some people to rule us by force. Now, think about
Right.
that for a moment. When I learned how the conscious process worked, what I learned was that all of those faculties that we've got collaborate with each other. Now, you think about it even further. Our heart and our lungs collaborate. Think about that. One's into hydraulics, the other one's into pneumatics. They work in completely different avenues of what we call industry, and yet they collaborate with one another. And so do all
Seamlessly.
seamlessly. And
Yeah.
so do all our mental faculties. But we're not taught any of that. And that's part of the problem. Because we're not shown that there's any option other than what we're taught, we don't bother to inquire or seek an alternative because we don't believe one exists. And I recognise that the problem that we've got in this world is alerting people to the fact that not only does a problem exist, but the solution lies within all of us. All we need to do is understand how it works. And when we understand how it works, I'll tell you what happened to me. Fear just vanished off the planet.
But you said the key thing there. I want you to reemphasize the answer lies within us. It's
Yes.
not out there, and that's the thing that I think many people don't get. That they're looking outwardly to find an answer, and I say it all the time. The answers are in here, and we need to evaluate what is right for us.
And that's the beauty of it. Angela, what happened was when I realised that there were only about 15 life values and that we could put them on autopilot, I had tears of compassion for the human race flowed down my face for a month.
Mm,
Unreal. There wasn't a day go by when I was sitting at the computer that I couldn't see the keyboard for tears.
mm, mm.
I realised the power that we'd been given and gifted by our Creator, and we had never discovered it. And there it
So
is.
many
We're all,
people take it for granted, Ken. That's the problem. They take this life for granted. We think, oh, we're just here. We just got to do all the things that we're supposed to do. We just live in this life and go into work and go into school and we don't stop and evaluate that there's something greater. We got caught up, and I hate even using the term, in this matrix, and we put more value into what others say, and we elevate people into positions where we think they're superior in some way to us. And I keep trying to express to people, really what's superior to us is God. And that goes back to your speaking about divine law. It really is the Creator who told us what the laws are, and all these other laws that are man-made are made up. They're fiction.
well, there's a fellow in the Netherlands. He's a philosopher of law. His name is Frank van Dun. I came across his work a number of years ago, and he made it quite clear that law, what we call law, is not law at all. It's statutes, it's legislations, executive orders. It goes under all of those names. It is not law. Law is what is like, if you think about the law of gravity. Well, if I hold my hand out and I've got a ball in it and I drop it and it bounces on the plant, I say, oh, you beauty. I can make games out of that. We can have netball, we can have volleyball, we can have all these wonderful games made with a ball. Isn't gravity wonderful? It's taught me what I can do. If, on the other hand, I hold my hand out and I hold a wine glass in it and I drop the wine glass on the concrete, I say, oh, the law of gravity is teaching me, understand what it is that you're dropping. Start to learn and inquire into what it is that you're doing. Make valued choices. That's what the law of gravity is teaching us. Now, if you understand law like that, the 20 natural laws that I found in the governing process, 14 of them reward you for the good things that you do, and they chastise the bad things that you do. 3 of the remaining laws will put your train back on the rails if it falls off, and the last 3 will keep your train on the rail in the first place. And all of those have been gifted by the Creator, and not one of them is written in a book. They're written into our nature.
I
And
really think that
you can't,
we hold the divine in us, and too many of us can't get in touch with it. Like we're there's a separation, a disconnect between our humanness and our divineness. And I think the consciousness piece is what can help bring those two together.
you know what I found out? Our conscience, if you go back to that diagram, don't bring it up on screen.
Okay.
This conscience alerts us to where we're going in terms of spiritual values before we act. Our feelings give us a checkpoint after we've acted. Now think about that. Now you go back to intuition. What is intuition? Intuition happens when we're going through that process of evaluation and asking what we can do and where we can do, how we can do it, etc., etc. Because our perception process is looking over our shoulder. It sees the inquiries we're making, it sees the phone call we make, it sees the newspaper reports we read. It understands exactly where we're going with all this. So it's searching behind the scenes, and it can piece the two together. It knows what we value, it knows what we're trying to do, and so it comes out and gives us some information and says, have you thought of this? That's what we call intuition. Now, if you think about it, that's Creator's gift of Google, a search engine, in our conscious process. That's what it is.
And it's much better.
It's a million times better.
Yes.
We've got a built-in search engine. We've got conscience as a checkmate. We've got feelings as our Creator's gift of a mentoring system, and it's fully automatic. When you think about conscious processes like that, how richly blessed are we?
Yeah.
And most people know nothing about it. It's
And
scary.
what do you think is the reason? Is it just us giving up our sovereignty to other beings who what is it that gets us there?
We most people haven't made that deliberate choice. What's happened is that those who rule us made that choice because they know full well that if the information I'm talking about got out, their ruling empire would crash overnight.
We have a comment from the viewing audience that says we need to trust our gut.
Absolutely. Yep.
So that
Well,
that says it all in colloquial terms, but it really goes to we already know. We just have to trust it.
it's a subconscious mind. I've got to the point now where I went through a process where I would say to my subconscious mind, this is what I want to do today. Then I got to the point of saying, will you help me? Then I got to the point of saying, we will do this. In other words, my cognitive mind and my subconscious mind are now joining together on the same page, and we will do it as one entity. And that's
Mm.
when I learned collaboration and cooperation. Now, I had a situation in Sydney, most people know this in Australia. A number of years ago, I worked for a company, and they had enormous success. I was pivotal in it. And it was 50 years. It took me 50 years before I realised exactly what it was that they were doing. And when I realised it, I thought, you beauty. I worked in a process which showed how they could improve, and they did. Their advertising costs went from about, the normal 100% down to about 12%. Their sales improved rapidly. Benefits spread across to themselves and their customers and their sub suppliers. It was just unbelievable. And when I realised what it wasn't, I wasn't going to compete with the other fellow across town who does what I do. I'm going to cooperate with my market base and deliver what they want. And so they went out and they researched and said, what does the market base want? And then they found a way to make it. And they also inquired what price the market was prepared to pay for that. So they produced a product at a price the market was prepared to pay it, and then sit back and reap the benefits. But so did the market, because that's what they told them they wanted. So the company benefited and the market benefited. When I realised it was all about cooperation, competition flies out the door.
Right.
And yet we've been living in a situation where today, all enterprises are built on competition.
Yeah,
If we could go
unfortunately.
back, forget about what your neighbour's doing down the road, your competition, builder or pharmacist or whatever it might be, forget about them. Cooperate with your market base and you'll succeed. It's that
And
simple.
isn't that what a community is supposed to do? Aren't they supposed to be more of a collaborative unit? That, over the last 4 or 5 years, I have seen families separated completely, it's exasperating trying to describe how much we have fractured our families, and then communities have been fractured, and as a nation, we here in the United States, I feel fractured. Pieces are coming back together, but my concern is if we don't realize the way God intended us to live is as communities, not as individuals here and there doing our own thing and ignoring, like you said, competing with one another, but more collaboration, we actually will have greater abundance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a very valuable lesson I learned in life back in the 1980s. I visited Orange County in California. I was there for a month, and I was there studying how Americans built houses and comparing it with what I knew, because my career was in housing design in Australia. And I learned that in Australia, well, I'd known for many years, of course, and prior to that, even in New Zealand, um, that when we take our plans to the local government, local council, if you call them counties, to have them approved, the average response is, yes, you will have to comply with this and you'll have to comply with that. You'll have to fill in this form. And by the way, you'll have to fill in that form and that form and that form. And please pay at the counter on your way out. And don't forget, you've just overrun your parking time and the parking meters, right? In other words, it's all oppression. When I went to America, I found out how their local governments worked in the same way. And the attitude was, when you walked in the door, the fellow said, how can we help you get what you want? A totally different approach.
It is.
And I thought to myself, that's the difference, isn't it? And that's really what this collaboration is versus competition.
Yeah.
How can I help you get what you want?
And
Now,
how can
obviously,
we as a society help promote the betterment for everyone rather than for individuals getting one individual over another? How can we collaboratively work towards the betterment of society overall?
Yes, absolutely. But you see, here's where the thing bridges now. If I program my mind that I only want to listen to the truth,
Hmm.
and I ask that question, how can we do that? And I find somebody who wants to deal in untruths, and I just turn my back on that person and walk away.
But
Because
that's
my
true in all situations. You have to make those evaluations. You can't just blindly accept everything. That's what, you know, discernment, using your intuition, discerning what is right for you, and then using your critical thinking skills to put together the pieces that actually work for you. I'm not saying you just blindly go into things, but I think using all those values, I think that's what gets us to a better place.
but you see what I mean now? That the deliberate attempt now to and using that imagination to program into your subconscious mind means that all of those things like your conscience and your feelings and even your intuition are now working as checkpoints and making sure you don't fall into somebody's trap of
Right.
being conned or misguided or propagandized or whatever name you want to give it that leads you down the garden path to nowhere.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit. I know your book Navigate to Freedom and the other one Conscious Ascendance. You kind of explore the pathways to personal sovereignty and societal
Yeah,
transformation.
yeah.
In your third book, Nature's Providence, unites what's it, conscious process with spiritual values.
Well,
How does this flow, and how does this connect people to be more empowered, not only as individuals but as society as a whole?
well, yes, that's interesting. The first book, Conscious Ascendance, deals with the conscious process and reveals the natural laws. The second book takes those natural laws and it develops them in two ways. Firstly, on the personal level, so it deals with things like how do we determine our ethics and our morality and what natural justice ought to be. And then it moves out of that and then moves in how can we introduce that into society. And when you understand that the conscious process, the subconscious and conscious mind, one cannot rule the other, what it's effectively telling us through God's blessing is that no mind can rule another. And so you realise then that authoritarian government has got to go. That doesn't mean we don't need protection. We have a form of government which I call a protecteur, which word was last used in the 1500s. I've revised it. But effectively, it's if you think about it as government, but all it does is not govern us, it protects us from those who would stand over us and rule us and commit crimes against us. But it also does things protecting us by maintaining things like radar stations and coastal lighthouses and so on, which protect ships and transport and aircraft and so on. The third book explores all of that freedom, which is introduced in the second book, and it brings it back into the realm of objective philosophy. In other words, those values that you're programming into your mind is changing the way you live in philosophical terms, so that you're living a spiritual life now, and physicality and the material world are just toolboxes for exercising your spirituality. And that casts mankind in a completely different frame of reference to the point where I'm not just a physical thing living in a physical universe. And even though I might have some spiritual thoughts now and again, I'm actually a spiritual being living a spiritual life. And all that materiality is doing is it's providing me a mechanism by which I can express my own spirituality. And so I'm now more in line with my Creator and that divine presence. I'm preparing my soul for its next life, however you might want to describe that. I'm doing all those wonderful things, and I've progressed all the way through that. And I've got to that point now where, when you stop and think about it, that philosophical process is really taking you right back to that diagram that I first showed on screen, that value transfer wave. And it's saying, yes, do you see it now? That philosophy is exactly how that conscious process works. And then you find that you've got unity happening across the whole spectrum. And all of it is wrapped around that cooperative enterprise in terms of community and sovereignty that we were talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I was reading, you described humanity as being on the brink of a new epoch.
Yep.
What does this transformation look like? And what role do all these, the intrinsic natural law, consciousness, what plays into this?
Fundamentally, it's a revolution in the mindset. Our present mindset is that we have to be ruled by some elected body of people. Now, it doesn't matter what you call them, whether you call them a parliament or a congress or a communist party or a WHO or a United Nation, whatever it is, we've got that mindset that we have to be ruled. And when you understand that conscious process, it says, no, what Creator has built into us is self-governance, where we decide. Our free will is like the conductor standing in front of an orchestra of 76 instruments, conducting the whole sonata, right? The whole thing. And it has to be in conscious process with the orchestra itself, or it doesn't work. And that orchestra is your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind is directly connected to spirit, to creator. We are co-creators. And it's all being governed by the free will. That free will, go through that conscious process, is being given the benefit of a search engine through intuition. It's been given a checkpoint of consciousness, been given a checkpoint of feelings. All of it is orchestrated together to help that free will master itself. So now we're talking about self-governance. So coming back to your question, moving into this new era, we're moving from an era where we're dependent on someone else to tell us what to do to the point where we self-govern ourselves, and we do it in full respect of everybody else's right to do the same. In other words, it takes you as close as you can get back to the 1776 Declaration of Independence. When Jefferson declared America's independence from Great Britain, somebody questioned him a few years later and said, "Did you mean independence just from Great Britain for Americans, or did you mean independence for the people of the world?" He said, "Now you've got it." And that's the difference. So it's not just independence from a nation state, it's independence in respect to other people. So that part of your independence is respecting other people. Now, when you think about it, the more I respect your rights, Angela, to your freedom, the more I protect my own.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense.
If I do that to every member of the community, then I've cemented my own freedom. And all it takes is for me to be respectful to other people. They are the conductors of their lives. I'm the conductor of mine. I respect their rights, but I don't respect their right to infringe on mine, and neither do I infringe on theirs.
Perfectly said.
It's
So,
simple.
what do you see are the biggest obstacles of having this transformation into a new world look like? What obstacles do you see?
The biggest obstacle basically is our vocabulary. Because one of the things that I'm finding is that it's extremely difficult to express what I've come to understand using words that are common in the dictionary, because people have a different impression on it. For argument's sake, if I use the word, and I've not used it greatly in my books, if I use the word human, there are many people around now who are in the so-called freedom movement, and they refer back to Black's Law Dictionary and they say the word human means monster. And I'm saying, hold on a moment. Were you born into the human race by your creator? Are you telling me that the creator created a monster? Do you respect your creator, or are you going to spit in his face? Make up your mind. Tell Black's Law Dictionary to go jump.
Or pound sand, as we say.
You are a magnificent creature of creation, the greatest creator that the world has ever known and will ever know. Accept it. Say thank you. Express gratitude for being what you are. Live your life that way. Tell others as they ask. Respect them to ask. And we can move on. So going back to your question, the biggest hurdle, I think, is our language. We've got to move into a new form of language where I've actually written about 3 pages already of words I've used in my book. I'm saying I'm using it in this sense. And I learned that from Frank van Dam, the philosopher of law in the Netherlands. There's another one, for argument's sake. For instance, if you go back to the word selfish. Now, prior to 1940, Ayn Rand made this known in her book. Some of your readers will have read Atlas Shrugged, I'm sure, Ayn Rand's book. It's become famous, and I think it was the second biggest seller in the Bible, to the Bible in America for the last 20 years. She said, go back to the 1940s, the word selfish means concern with one's own interest. But she said, if you look in the modern dictionary, it says concern with one's own interest at the expense of others. They put a moral overtone to it, which was never there in the first place.
We have
And that's,
bastardized our language. We use words in ways that they were never intended, and yet then they stick and they get repeated over and over again. So then they become they come into the lexicon, and I say, and I have actually been thinking about doing a podcast, words have meaning, and we need to go back and use what the words mean and stop making up things that trivialize what words are. I agree with you. I mean, as a health coach, talking about selfish, people think, oh, if I do this for myself, I'm selfish. And I'm like, yes, that's what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to take care of yourself first. So it's really important that we use the right word. So I think you're right on there. That's spot on.
yeah, well, Ayn Rand wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. And of course, that doesn't go down well with most people, but if you read it, it makes perfect sense, right? Being selfish, concerned with your own interests, is what we all ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that what an infant's doing when it's holding out its hand and pointing at the corner of the room, saying to its subconscious mind, please teach me to crawl?
Yeah.
It's being selfish. It's concerned with its own interest. It's not doing it at anybody's expense.
No. I think
So,
you are clearly articulating things that people may not even have thought about. Like, how did we get here? Is because we changed the way we speak, and we use words whose meaning no longer means what they were invented to mean. So we need to go back to use the right language. We need to envision a world where the words that we use are for good and not to twist them to make them something bad or something malevolent.
yeah. Well, it goes even further. If you take the word freedom, as Ayn Rand pointed out, freedom doesn't mean freedom from your landlord. It doesn't mean freedom from your spouse, right? It means freedom from government coercion. That's what it means, right? Now you think about that. If you enter into a marriage contract, then that was what you engaged with your partner, and that was what you chose. It's nothing to do with the government. And that's part of the problem we've got, because we've got a situation now where the government endorses all our marriages. And really, the government plays no part in any of that. It's between the two people involved.
Right.
But let's not go down too far down that track. But you can see what's happening is now that where I'm going in this conscious process is it starts to bring us to the point where we have to re-understand our vocabulary and reapply it. And again, I can't help but emphasise that if we can invest in those spiritual values in our mind and make those into our subconscious mind so they run on autopilot, then every time we're confronted by one of those, we get a checkpoint. The conscience says, whoops, hold on a minute, Ken. Watch where you're going there. You're treading on thin ground. And it'll alert me to the fact that I, in that situation, need to make that change. So we can use the values then as that checkpoint. And if we can install those values, the spiritual values, and I tell people, write your own list. Don't take, I've written about 5 different lists, but there are some things on it that will occur to all of them. Things like truth and honesty, for argument's sake, will appear on everybody's list, right? But you get down to the finer points of it, and then it gets down to the point where I found that if I built any more than about 15, maybe 18, I'm starting putting subset values of the ones I've already got on my list. So I'm saying, okay, now I have to decide which ones. In other words, which comes first, truth or honesty? Don't they both mean the same thing? Not strictly, but they're both dealing with the same thing. So you can make truth as being your prime value and honesty as being a subset value, right? Then when you program truth into your mind, honesty is automatically included as that subset. because it's part and parcel of what truth is all about. So if you identify those 15 values, you change your life. And there's only 15, you can put them on all on autopilot. The whole world changes. So I said, fear just completely disappeared.
Right. So would
You
you
can just,
suggest to someone who's new to these ideas that that's where they should start, write down their values, kind of order them for themselves? And how is this going to help them like move forward to become more sovereign and a more conscious being?
yes, yes. When you realize that the values is actually the communication between our conscious and subconscious mind, like I showed in that sine wave, that crosses that barrier between the conscious and the subconscious mind about 7 times going through that program, or upwards of 7 times, right? Now, when you realize that you're transferring through that all the time, then it means that in that cognitive process that you're going through, you're accessing all those subconscious values that you've stored in your subconscious mind, right? So the more you can then say, okay, look, let me make a list of the things that I value most in life. Now, if you think about it, it's not that difficult to do. Because if you think about the way the subconscious mind governs your process at the moment, let me give you an example. How many of your viewers, you don't need to put your hands up, but how many of your viewers have driven across town and got to the other side of town and said, how did I get here? I don't remember going past the school. I don't remember going through the traffic lights. I don't remember driving past the bank. But I'm here. I must have. Your subconscious mind drove the car the whole way. Because all you did was said, I want to get to that destination. And you got in the car and the subconscious mind took over and drove it. Meanwhile, you were having a conversation with your partner sitting alongside you, but was on television last night. The car drove that thing the whole way across town, and you don't remember a bit of it. That's how, if you program those values into your subconscious mind will run your life for you, according to the values that you choose. So when I wrote those list of 15 values and I got to the point where I said, any more of these are subset values, I said, you beauty, thank you. Gratitude to the creator. He's made it simple. I've only got 15 and I can put them all on autopilot. I can sit back and do what an aircraft pilot does. Like once when I flew across Australia, actually to my wedding, I was in a jumbo jet and had 13 crew on board and only 7 passengers. And I said to one of the crew, can I go up and talk to the pilot? And I did, and went up to the cabin in the jumbo jet way across Australia. And he was sitting back with his feet up on the thing watching the cricket in Adelaide on television. The plane was running on autopilot. He showed me, he said, you might think this is a bit sort of, off the beat. We're quite relaxed. We're flying a plane across Australia and he's watching the TV. But he said, watch this. Supposing something goes wrong in the aircraft. He said, look at all these dials I've got in front of me. How am I going to know which one's not telling me the truth? He said, there's a built-in fail-safe system in here. He said, watch. And he showed me. He said, this is what happens when there's an error. Every instrument on that panel lit up.
Mm.
Every one of them. He pushed another button. The only one that stayed on was the one where the problem is. He identified it like that. Later, I realised that's exactly what it's doing. It's monitoring everything you do. So when in that S diagram, I said how it's monitoring and making assessments. At split-second intervals, it's monitoring every cell in your body. There's 50 trillion of them. 50 trillion.
Wow.
And it's monitoring every one at light speed. That's how clever our subconscious is.
Yeah.
And it can identify what's going wrong like that.
Well, Ken, this has been an amazing conversation. We've already gone through past our hour. I want to thank you and ask you to just stay on for a few moments as we go on our exit here. Thank everybody who's tuned in. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I'll be re-uploading this, so we'll have a full video and everybody will be able to see from beginning to end. And I thank you all for coming. And I thank you so much, Ken, for all your wisdom and for sharing it with us tonight.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I wish you, like I've said before, Happy New Year, and to all of your viewers. Enjoy life and enjoy the new year. It's wonderful.
Amen. And to everyone, have a great new year and God bless.